At first glance, it looked like another luxury high-rise tragedy. A husband claiming he had just found his wife dead. Panic in his voice. Urgency in the 911 call. 2 bodies inside a downtown apartment. But what Ali Abulaban didn't realize was that by the time he picked up that phone, the truth had already started closing in on him. Security cameras had captured his movements. His own digital trail was everywhere. And the version of events he was about to tell police was already falling apart. This is the story of how a man who built his image online as funny, charismatic, and larger than life became the center of one of the most chilling murder cases tied to social media fame. Behind the skits, the impressions, the live streams, and the millions of views was a relationship rotting from jealousy, control, humiliation, and fear. And when that relationship finally collapsed, Ali chose not to let go. Instead, he turned obsession into surveillance, rage into murder, and then tried to act like he was just another grieving husband. By the time this case was over, the mask had completely slipped. Before the murders, before the arrest, before the manhunt, there were warning signs. Lots of them. On one occasion, dispatchers in San Diego received a troubling call from Anna Abulaban. She was inside the apartment she shared with her husband Ali, and she needed police. Her voice was tense, careful, controlled. She explained that she was having a fight with her spouse. She confirmed it had become physical. She didn't sound dramatic. She sounded cautious, like someone trying not to make the situation worse while still reaching for help. And while she was speaking to emergency dispatch, Ali realized what was happening. He mocked her for calling police. He reacted not with concern, not with shame, but with anger that she had involved law enforcement. That response alone said a lot. It was the kind of moment that reveals the real balance of power in a relationship. Anna wasn't simply dealing with arguments. She was dealing with a man who wanted control and who treated her reaching out for help as a betrayal. When officers arrived, Anna explained what had happened. The argument had started over something small, a suitcase. But like many abusive situations, the trigger wasn't the real issue. It was simply the excuse for an explosion. During the confrontation, Ali pushed her. She fell, scraped her knee, and hit her head against the bed. Officers documented the injuries. They photographed the apartment. They told her she could seek a restraining order. She chose not to. And that decision is one that people often misunderstand when they look at abuse from the outside. Many ask why victims stay, why they don't leave sooner, why they don't follow through the first time. But relationships like this are rarely simple. Fear, emotional dependency, immigration concerns, a child in the middle, financial instability, hope that things will get better, shame, exhaustion. All of that gets tangled together. Anna was not weak. She was trapped in something that had been building for a long time. And it hadn't always looked this way. Anna Marie had roots in the Philippines and was raised in Okinawa. She was known online and had a modest but visible social media presence. She appeared often in Ali's content, and from the outside they looked like a modern internet couple. Attractive, social, photogenic, living in a luxury apartment, raising a daughter, posting snippets of family life and success. It was exactly the kind of image social media rewards. Ali, meanwhile, had created a much larger online persona. He was known as Jin Kid, and his content was getting serious traction. He built his popularity through skits, exaggerated characters, impressions, and especially his takes on pop culture figures like Scarface. His energy was loud, theatrical, and aggressive, in a way that played well online. He could be funny, outrageous, and memorable, and that formula worked. His following exploded. He gained hundreds of thousands of followers and became a recognizable internet personality. To viewers, it probably looked like he had everything going for him. But the polished online version of Ali was only one side of him. Behind the scenes, the marriage was deteriorating. His jealousy was intensifying. His temper was worsening. He started turning private arguments into public performances, posting rants about Anna, humiliating her online, and constantly framing himself as the victim. He would accuse her, belittle her, record her, and push their domestic chaos into the public eye. He wanted not just to control the relationship, but to control the narrative around it. That mattered to him. Because for men like Ali, image is power. The more attention he got online, the more he seemed to use performance as a weapon. The internet didn't just give him validation, it gave him an audience. And once a man starts seeing his personal life as a stage, the people around him stop being loved ones and start becoming characters in his version of the story. Anna was living inside that performance. Publicly, she appeared in videos and family content. Privately, according to records and witness accounts, she was dealing with a man who had become deeply possessive and emotionally abusive. Fights escalated. Neighbors heard arguments. Friends became concerned. Police were called more than once. And yet no arrest came early enough to stop what was building. By 2021, the cracks were no longer hidden. Ali's insecurity became one of the driving forces in the relationship. He accused Anna of cheating. He resented her having friends. He lashed out over the possibility of other men in her life, even while his own behavior was far from innocent. He seemed to believe that he could do what he wanted, but she could not. That double standard is common in abusive dynamics. It isn't about faithfulness, it's about ownership. And the more Anna tried to create space, the worse he got. He would rant publicly about her immigration status. He would throw the sacrifices he claimed to have made back in her face. He would act like bringing her to the United States gave him permanent leverage over her. That kind of language wasn't just cruel, it was strategic. It was meant to remind her that he believed she owed him, that her life, security, and future were tied to him. The abuse wasn't only emotional either. During one confrontation, he reportedly put a gun to his own head while their daughter was nearby, using self-destruction as another form of control. He was high, unstable, desperate for attention, and willing to terrify Anna in order to pull her back into his orbit. That kind of behavior leaves deep damage. It tells a victim that anything can happen, that no moment is safe, that every argument might become something worse. And still, he alternated between cruelty and apology. That cycle matters, because people like Ali rarely stay monstrous every second. They break you down, then they cry. They threaten, then they apologize. They humiliate, then they promise change. And each apology buys them more time. At one point, Anna made it clear that the marriage was over. She no longer wanted to live like that. She told him she wanted a divorce. That decision didn't come out of nowhere. It came after repeated incidents, repeated fear, repeated disappointment. The home no longer felt safe. The relationship no longer felt fixable. And by then, she had reached the point many victims eventually reach, the point where survival matters more than keeping the peace. Ali moved into a nearby hotel, but he did not move on. Physically, he was out of the apartment. Emotionally and psychologically, he was still all over her life. He kept calling, messaging, pleading, raging, trying to convince her that the separation wasn't real. To him, the relationship wasn't over because he didn't accept that it was over. That's what made him dangerous. At some point after the separation, Anna began seeing another man, Rayburn Barron. He was someone she had known for a long time, someone close to her, someone who had been supportive through the turmoil. Ali already disliked him. He sensed that Rayburn cared about Anna, and unlike Ali, Rayburn represented something threatening in a different way. Not because he was violent, but because he was the opposite of violence. He was the possibility of peace, stability, and a life beyond Ali's control. Ali could not tolerate that. And instead of walking away, he escalated to something even more invasive. He turned to surveillance. Using his daughter's iPad, he installed a hidden app prosecutors would later describe as a kind of baby monitor setup. That device, something meant for a child, became a tool for stalking. It was placed under the bed inside Anna's apartment, quietly transmitting audio back to him wherever he was. From his hotel room, Ali could listen in on what was happening inside the home. Think about how disturbing that is. Anna had already told him the marriage was over. He was no longer living there. And still he found a way to keep himself in the room. Listening, monitoring, waiting. He wanted to know who was there, what she was doing, whether she was truly moving on. It wasn't concern. It wasn't heartbreak. It was control refusing to die. This wasn't a one-off act either. It fit a broader pattern. He had already recorded arguments, posted humiliating content, monitored her behavior, and tried to weaponize public opinion. The hidden app was simply the next step in that same obsession. Then came the day everything exploded. On the afternoon of October 21st, Ali was listening through that secret setup. What he heard were voices inside Anna's apartment. One was Anna. The other was Rayburn. That was all it took. Whatever remained of his restraint collapsed. Fueled by jealousy, anger, and cocaine, he armed himself and headed toward the apartment. Security cameras would later become some of the most devastating evidence in the case. They showed him entering the building. They showed him moving through the garage. At one point he ran back outside, then returned again. He adjusted the belt around his holster. He was not drifting aimlessly toward some emotional breakdown. He was arriving armed, purposefully, deliberately. Then he entered the building and got on the elevator. That footage is chilling because of how ordinary he looked. Calm, composed, quiet. He rode up like any other resident or visitor. There was no visible panic, no obvious frenzy. And during that ride, he even exchanged casual words with other people in the building. That's what makes cases like this so disturbing. A man can be carrying murder in his pocket and still look normal in an elevator. He had also activated an audio recorder on his phone and slipped it into his pocket. That detail matters because it shows thought, planning, consciousness. He was not simply exploding in a blind fog. He was documenting. Using a copied building access card and a key, he made his way to Anna's apartment. He reached the door, let himself in, and walked inside. Rayburn was the first to be shot. Ali fired quickly. Multiple bullets. The shots were directed at Rayburn's head and throat. It was immediate and fatal. There was no warning that mattered, no chance of defense, no struggle that changed the outcome. Rayburn collapsed. Anna was there beside him. And then Ali turned the gun on her. He shot her in the forehead. Just like that, 2 lives were gone. A woman who had tried to leave, a man who had stood beside her, both dead inside the apartment that had already been poisoned by fear for months. But even after the murders, Ali's actions remained shockingly calculated. Inside the apartment, he took out his phone and photographed the scene. He took pictures of Anna and Rayburn lying where they had fallen. Then he sent those images to people, including his parents and friends. That decision is difficult to fully comprehend. It showed not just detachment, but a grotesque sense of performance, as though even this needed an audience. Then he called his mother and told her what he had done. After that, he left the apartment and rode the elevator again with other residents, as if he had not just executed 2 people upstairs. He did not call 911 from inside the building. He did not wait by the bodies. He did not behave like a man who had stumbled onto a tragedy. Instead, he got to his car. Then he made the call. On that 911 call, Ali tried to sound devastated. He claimed he had found his wife and another man dead. He described bullet holes to the face. He identified himself as the husband. He performed shock. He performed confusion. He tried to place himself outside the crime scene as the one discovering what someone else had done. But the evidence was already destroying that story. Police entered the apartment and found exactly what the call described: 2 victims down. Officers quickly secured the scene. They reviewed surveillance footage from the building, and almost immediately, Ali became the center of the investigation. The video placed him there. His movements were tracked. His vehicle was identified. The city was alerted that he was on the run with his daughter and that he should be considered armed and dangerous. Meanwhile, Ali picked up his daughter from school and drove away. That detail says a lot about his thinking. He had just murdered 2 people, staged a false discovery call, and instead of surrendering or facing what he had done, he collected his child and got on the road. Later, he would try to frame this as the act of a caring father, making sure she was safe. But that explanation collapses under the weight of everything else. A truly innocent man who had just discovered a double murder would not behave that way. He would stay. He would cooperate. He would not be the one police needed to hunt. Eventually, officers tracked him down and stopped the vehicle. He was arrested. From there, investigators began building the full case. They seized phones, social media content, recordings, texts, and anything else that could reconstruct the lead-up to the murders. And the deeper they looked, the worse it got. This wasn't just a moment of jealousy. It was a pattern of obsession, intimidation, humiliation, control, digital surveillance, and threats. Yet even in custody, Ali continued performing. At one point, he gave a television interview about the case. And in that interview, he came across less like a man confronting reality and more like a man still trying to direct the script. He presented the murders as a crime of passion. He cried. He ranted. He acted heartbroken. He said he had been listening through the iPad. He described hearing another man's voice. He talked about speeding to the apartment while high and distraught. He portrayed himself as overwhelmed, almost separated from his own body, as if the murders had happened through him rather than because of him. It was a familiar strategy. Minimize intention, maximize emotion, shift focus from the victims to his pain. But prosecutors were not interested in his performance. They were interested in the evidence. And the evidence pointed to premeditation. He had installed the app. He had monitored Anna. He had armed himself. He had traveled to the apartment with a loaded gun. He had used copied access tools to get inside. He had recorded audio. He had killed 2 people. He had photographed the bodies. He had lied to 911. He had left with his child. That is not the profile of a man who simply snapped in some unknowable instant. That is the profile of someone who made choices, one after another, each of them bringing him closer to murder. By the time the case went to trial, prosecutors had an overwhelming story to tell. And it was not just about what happened that day. It was about everything that came before it. They introduced disturbing text messages and voice messages Ali had sent Anna in the days leading up to the crime. The language was vicious, degrading, and revealing. These communications exposed the contempt underneath the supposed love he later claimed in interviews. They also showed how unstable and hostile he had become. When some of those messages were played, even Ali appeared uncomfortable. But discomfort after the fact means nothing when you were willing to send them in the first place. The prosecution argued that this was not a heat-of-the-moment act. It was murder shaped by obsession and made possible by planning. He didn't randomly wander into a scene and lose control. He put himself there. He stalked. He monitored. He armed himself. He entered. He killed. Witnesses also helped paint a fuller picture of his character. Family members and people close to the case made it clear that the marriage had been unraveling under enormous strain, and that Ali's behavior had become increasingly alarming. One of the painful truths to come out during trial was that this ending did not emerge from nowhere. There had been warnings. There had been fear. There had been multiple moments when the danger was visible. And then came the verdict. After reviewing the evidence and hearing the full history of the relationship, the jury found Ali Abulaban guilty of first-degree murder. The decision confirmed what prosecutors had argued all along. This was deliberate. This was intentional. This was not just rage. It was murder in the first degree. When the verdict landed, Ali broke down in court. But by then, the performance had no power left. The facts had already spoken. At sentencing, he read a letter trying once again to frame his actions as an impulsive reaction to discovering his wife with another man. He apologized. He said he was sorry. He described the killing as a horrendous act. But even then, the core of his language still centered on himself, his judgment, his reaction, his mental state in that moment. And that is often what remains so striking in cases like this. Even in apology, the killer cannot stop placing himself at the center. The court was not persuaded. Ali was sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 50 years to life. In practical terms, that means he will die in prison. And that is where this story ends for him. But for Anna and Rayburn, the story ended in a way they never should have had to face. Anna had tried to create distance. She had tried to reclaim her safety. She had endured public humiliation, private abuse, repeated manipulation, and escalating control. She was trying to get free. That matters, because too often victims are remembered only through the violence that ended their lives. But before she was murdered, Anna was a mother, a woman trying to survive a collapsing marriage, and someone attempting to build a life beyond fear. Rayburn, too, was more than the role assigned to him in Ali's jealous imagination. He was a person with a future, with relationships, with a life that did not deserve to end on someone else's floor because a controlling man could not accept rejection. That is what this case was really about. Not fame, not TikTok, not a glamorous high-rise murder mystery. It was about control. It was about a man who believed that if he could no longer possess his wife, then no one else would have her either. And that mindset is exactly what makes domestic violence so deadly. It isn't always loud at first. Sometimes it comes disguised as passion, protectiveness, jealousy, or heartbreak. But underneath it is something much darker. The belief that another person's freedom is negotiable, that leaving is betrayal, that independence deserves punishment. Ali Abulaban did not kill because he loved too much. He killed because he could not control. He killed because he was entitled. He killed because Anna's decision to move on felt, in his mind, like something he had the right to override. And so he listened through an iPad, armed himself, entered her home, and executed 2 people in broad daylight. Then he tried to rewrite the story. But the cameras saw him. The devices tracked him. His own actions exposed him. And in the end, no performance was strong enough to save him from the truth. For Whispers of Crime, this case stands as one of the clearest examples of how danger can hide behind charisma, online fame, and public humor. Millions may know a face from a screen and still know absolutely nothing about the violence happening just beyond the frame. And that is the part worth remembering. Because sometimes the most frightening people are not the ones who look broken. They are the ones who know exactly how to perform normal right up until the moment they destroy everything.